Hello and welcome. Sit back and enjoy a brief flight into the world of accounting theories, riding on the Legitimacy Theory 737. Once you've checked you're safely comfortable in your seat, we'll begin the journey. We start with a brief introduction to accounting, and at cruising level we'll discuss an article by Nye and Taylor, followed by a focus on what they found and how this relates to accounting theories. Sit back and enjoy the ride. There are a number of accounting theories working to inform practitioners. Accounting theories give us a framework or a foundation on which to base our knowledge and understanding of accounting practices. Having a good foundation and understanding can enable us to critically examine our accounting practices and understand how the practices we use impact on society and what best serves the society that we're operating in. Accounting is the language of business. Its purpose is to measure the results of an organisation's economic activities and then communicate this to a variety of people. Many years ago, accounting practices were simple. Now accountants measure and report on the finances of global businesses. I run a small widget business from my hometown. I want to expand and have 2 factories, one in one town, one in a neighbouring town. As the transport routes open up, I think it'd be great to sell my widgets overseas. Then I consider that actually overseas I could make my widgets cheaper and run my business from another country, and I'm a global business. This changing world has impacted on the accounting practices and policies we use and what businesses need to do. So when we consider the legitimacy theory specifically, we have to realise that businesses don't operate in isolation. They're influenced by society's norms and values, and as society changes, businesses must adapt. Today there is pressure to operate in this global manner, but socially responsibly. So a legitimate business is one that's valued by society and therefore is an ongoing success, in theory. The accounting theory. If we consider the economic assumption that all action by people is driven by their own self-interest, if this assumption holds, it's plausible to believe that all companies and businesses are simply a group of self-interested people who are working together. So if we think of my widget example, I've got managers in several countries, and I ask them to produce financial statements. How do I know that their actions are increasing the wealth of my business? So the positive accounting theories seek to align these managers' interests and the owners' interests. Actually, positive accounting theory looks at a lot of different relationships where resources are being provided. One way to help align the interests of managers and owners is to give remuneration that encourages the managers to increase their wealth, which also increases the shareholders' wealth. How do we know that they're achieving this? We use accounting practices. They provide the numbers to base remuneration on. So what policy and practice we use are really important. Legitimacy theory is a systems-orientated theory, and it can be considered an inductive social research method. So we're looking to be legitimate in the society we work in. We need to know about what that society thinks. So we use social research methods. Inductive or deductive are 2 broad reasonings of social research. In inductive research, the data is analysed for patterns. So these observations are made, the data is analysed, we look at the patterns, and from this a hypothesis or theory can be developed. In this way, inductive reasoning explains why businesses use the accounting policies they do and predicts what these businesses and similar ones might do in the future. The study we're going to consider next gathers data or observations on disclosure of share-based payments to top Australian executives. In 2008, Nye and Taylor published an article in the Journal of Corporate Governance entitled Legitimacy in Corporate Governance, Determinants of Executives' Remuneration Disclosures. Simply, how much information do listed Australian companies tell or disclose to the public about the payments they make to their top management? And how do these disclosures or information practices relate to legitimacy theory? The captain has informed me that we're at article cruising level. The research looks fine. Please remain seated and take a moment to view the cartoon. I think it's explained perhaps by an example of Bob Diamond of Barclays Bank, who in 2008 was set to receive a bonus remuneration package of £14.8 million, despite a mortgage crisis in 2007 that left the company with a £1.6 billion loss. So society and regulators have demanded more. The article's objectives then were to look at the Australian evidence of the extent of information disclosure about the payments they made to their top executives, and the second objective was to test the hypotheses on key determinants that influence the amount of information about these payments. In 2005, Australia is going to adopt the International Financial Reporting Standard No. 2. 701 students, cast your mind back to topic 4. This standard required companies to disclose their share-based executive remuneration, so Nye and Taylor wanted to consider what factors influenced disclosure in a voluntary nature before the regulations came to play. Nye and Taylor state that society norms have shifted, and we expect transparency of how much directors get, how much they're paid. They came to think around this about 5 hypotheses, the first 3 relating to legitimacy theory and the last 2 to corporate governance. Hypothesis 1 says the greater the media attention, the greater the extent of disclosure. So if the media are reporting on your company, you want to get information out there so people can make an informed decision. The second hypothesis is if you're proposing to increase how much you pay your management, and this has got to go to public, the shareholders, there'll be more disclosure, so they know why you want to do this. The third hypothesis is that the bigger the company, the more disclosure, just because of public interest. The next 2 hypotheses relate to corporate governance, how the companies run, and this is done by a board of directors. The authors suggest that if the composition of the board of directors is mainly made up of management or executives, there won't be very much disclosure. And if that company has a remuneration committee, it should be more transparent and have increased disclosure. Let's look at what they found. Certainly there was an increase in disclosure leading up to the regulations. However, the media coverage made no influence to big companies. The small to medium enterprises increased their disclosure in a small way to media coverage, but not the big companies. The companies to propose to increase their remuneration in a public forum, the AGM, had a much greater disclosure. Larger companies did have a greater disclosure. Those companies that had mostly management on the board of directors had less disclosure. And those companies with a remuneration committee, actually it made no difference to the disclosure. The results of this empirical study suggest that voluntary disclosure is limited prior to the adoption of the regulations, as evidenced by the 2.5 times increase in disclosure about share-based payments between 2003 and 2004. And there's no regulation to disclose termination benefit, so there was no increase in the disclosure about how much executives got paid when their employment finished. The biggest companies' disclosure was influenced by regulation, but not media. Perhaps this is related to the fact that big companies have resources to communicate directly to shareholders and didn't see any benefit to their legitimacy by responding to the media, whereas small medium companies may not have had the resources, so wanted to get some information out in the media. Not surprisingly, where the board wasn't very independent, that self-interest assumption dictated that there was less disclosure. So it suggests that companies could increase their legitimacy within society if they have a more independent board of directors. Unfortunately, where there is a remuneration committee, there was no change in disclosure. Again, perhaps this relates to the independency of who's on that board, and certainly this has been suggested in other articles. In summary, or the take-home message is that businesses, to be legitimate in their operations within society, need to be transparent. Their accounting practices need to support legitimate business operations. They should continually be informed and guided by social expectations, regulations, and ongoing research. Thank you very much. Take a moment to look at the bibliography.